Hi guys, we are going to talk about weapons and new technology, first used during World War One. And with this presentation, you have a document to fill out, and we're going to look at technology and weapons that facilitated war in the air, war in the sea or the ocean, war on the ground, and then specifically guns that were used during World War One. So as we go through this presentation, you can pause and fill out your chart. You're looking for each of these weapons listed under what was it. You're looking for what did it do, how did it impact the war, and what did it look like. And you're more than welcome to copy and paste. So, war in the air. So World War One was actually the first war to use planes and also to use something called a Zeppelin. This kid is saying, oh no, it's a Zeppelin. That's an airship that's used for bombing raids by the Germans. They carry machine guns and bombs. However, you can see they're a pretty easy target. So, they were used to bomb, and they could carry a lot of machine guns and bombs, but they were also an easy target to take down because they were so big. Guten Tag, I am the Red Baron, you may know me. I have 80 air combat victories for the German Empire. So planes were used, like I said, for the first time during World War One, and they were used for spying at first, but they also became fighter aircraft. So they started loading machine guns onto airplanes and bombs and cannons, and there were fights between planes in the sky. So these fights between two airplanes became known as dogfights, and you may recognize the Red Baron or the World War One flying ace if you're familiar with Snoopy and the Peanuts gang. Snoopy is the dog, and he likes to be the Red Baron from World War One, the World War One flying ace. So in order to be considered a flying ace, a fighter pilot had to shoot down 5 enemy airplanes. This bottom left says, believe it or not, World War One was the first ever war that was fought using, or the first war ever fought using airplanes. Eddie Rickenbacker was the top ace from the United States. He shot down 26 enemy planes. Sadly, because the airplane was a new invention, and with any new technology, they lost a lot of men during flight training. In fact, England lost almost 8,000 men just training them to fly planes, which was more than they lost in the actual fighting. So that's pretty tragic. All right, war on the sea or in the sea on water. So German U-boat submarines. A U-boat is short for an undersea boat. Germany deployed or used 375 U-boats. World War One was the first time that submarines were used as a major weapon of war. And you can look at the other numbers, average kills per boat, crew per submarine. But look at that number of Allied ships sunk. 7,544 Allied ships were sunk by German U-boats. Despite, however, that success, the biggest impact of the U-boats was the psychological effect on other countries. They carried maybe 6 torpedoes per boat, and this guy Lothar von Arnold de la Perriere was the most successful submarine ace of all time. He sunk, or 194 ships were sunk by him, by his submarines. And then what happened to the U-boats after World War One? Well, there were several lost in battle, 205, and then 170 were surrendered to Allies, but they did not keep them after the war. And we'll talk about one particular incident involving a German U-boat in our next lesson. All right, battleships. Doesn't that look like the battleship in the game Battleship? I used to love that game. So battleships were heavily armed. When we say armed, we mean carrying weapons, of course, but they were capable of launching artillery attacks onto land from the sea. So sometimes they were used to shoot onto land, but they also battled each other as they're carrying troops and supplies to different battlefields across the globe and across, while they're in the water, they fought each other. War on the ground. All right, so new technology, one big one was the automobile. Now, this obviously changes military transportation forever because now you have motor vehicles, and this was the first large-scale use of them during a war. But yeah, they could obviously carry soldiers or artillery, and yeah, changed military transportation. All right, tanks. So tanks were probably not a great thing to operate or piece of technology to operate because the inside was hot and loud and full of diesel fumes. And they were slow and sort of unreliable, but they did offer you protection. Like, you were not going to get shot if you were inside of a tank. And they could cross over the trenches and rough terrain, so they were useful for that. Poisonous gas. So the Germans first used chlorine gas in 1915, and after that, soldiers had to wear a gas mask, and that, I'm sure, was not very comfortable. I'm sure it was cumbersome. It says gas masks are helpful, but they sure make trying to fire a weapon difficult. Chlorine gas and mustard gas were the two main types of gases used during World War I. Mustard gas was called mustard gas because of its smell. It had a smell, but it also was clear, so it couldn't necessarily be detected. And it would cause blisters, painful blisters on skin. It might make your throat swell up, and it could even cause blindness. And then chlorine gas would burn your lungs and could cause a long, painful death by suffocation, which sounds just horrible. Eventually, poisonous gas stopped being used in World War I, partly because of the unpredictable wind changes. So imagine using a bunch of poisonous gas and then the wind changes and you can't control Mother Nature, and the gas suddenly is coming back towards your troops or your territory. So yeah, and then it was just gnarly too. It was just horrible. All right, so guns of World War I. Look at that giant thing. So machine guns were the Vickers gun was a popular British machine gun, but this was the first time machine guns were used during war, and they could match the power of 80 rifles. So if you picture, warfare prior to this, like maybe during the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, where you just had men with a rifle, and now all of a sudden you have the power of 80 rifles in one gun. There were some negatives, however. They were very useful, as you can imagine, on the battlefield, but they also could overheat and jam. So imagine being mid-battle and your machine gun jams up. And it took a team of 6 people to fix or keep one machine gun working. All right, artillery. So artillery is just another name for large guns, and some artillery would hurl shells for dozens of miles that weighed more than a car. So imagine the size of these shells being launched and traveling miles. Their artillery was used before World War I, but the advancements made leading up to the war made them more accurate and bigger and more explosive. So look at this kid with those shells, artillery casings. I bet on the right, and then I bet you don't want one of these being shot at your house or shot from 75 miles away and landing on your house. Yeah. So that concludes this section of World War I. information on new weapons and technology of World War One. And like